Why don't you take a seat and tell me what appears to be the problem? Let's consult the doctor. I am going to answer 4 more questions that I received. If you have any questions, then please leave them below. Forgive me for looking at my sheet of paper. I'm just writing down a timestamp. I have abbreviated some of these questions a little bit, but let's get started. Is it a cardinal sin to post a celluloid pen because it may be more comfortable, but then what about any damage? Let me answer that question in 2 parts. Posting any pen is not a cardinal sin, and it is not a cardinal sin to post any pen. Look at it this way. No, let me rephrase that. I look at it this way. Your pen is yours, and ask yourself what you want to do with that pen. If it is a pen that you want to maintain in pristine condition, as a collector's piece, maybe to make money off of it, to make it increase in value. Now, with some pens, that's never going to happen. With Monteverde pens, with Noodles pens, they're not going to increase in value. I don't believe that will happen. That's not a dig at those brands, it's just that that's not that type of pen. These are not collector's pieces. There are other brands in which that may happen. We know that it happens for Montblanc. #Hemingway, for example, and there are other brands like that. Certain pens are just collectible, okay, but that's not the discussion I want to have now. If you have such a pen and you want to keep that pen in such a state that it will increase in value, then you shouldn't use it, period. Then it should stay in its box, ideally in some sort of climate controlled room or in a safe or something, but it can't be used, because as soon as that pen is used, it loses value. Ink it up just once and it will lose value. If you post the pen and you get some micro scratches, because that's what we're talking about, right? You have a pen and then you post it and then you get some micro scratches. I know collectors, actual collectors, who would say you shouldn't do that. I'm looking at you, Sarah. But Calgary Pen Club. That's fine, right? That's absolutely fine. But then you are treating your pens as collector's pieces. Again, just the mere fact of you using them is already reducing their value. Because you asked me, I use my pens. And that means that some pens I post, some pens I don't post. If a pen is particularly light, here is the new Parker 51. It's a very light pen. I don't like to use it unposted. It's also a little small to me. I post it, and then it's comfortable. Has a bit more weight, has a bit more length. I like it. I like to use it that way, and thus I will. So, I think this is one of those questions. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. The collectors will say there is a right answer. You don't post your pen. Yeah, that makes sense to me, if that is your goal with that specific pen. If you're using that pen, does it matter? If your issue is, well, I have this pen, I use it, I want to be able to pass it on to my children or grandchildren, do you think they will care about a few micro scratches? Or do you think they will care about, this was Grandpa's pen? In my mind, the few micro scratches will add a little bit to the charm of that pen. But then that's just my opinion. I hope that helps. Carry on. Let's look at this. This was a question from an author who was asking for a good fountain pen ink for book signing that has good flow, but is quick drying and has no feathering or skipping. Well, I think there are a number of candidates in such a case, and there were the Montblanc had the permanent inks, which I think would be a good choice, but I haven't seen those for a long time. I wouldn't be surprised if that discontinued. I only had like single bottles of them. I never bothered to refill them. So I don't know if they're still in the market. Again, I haven't seen them in a while. There are other brands that have similar inks. Think of I want to say it was the De Atramentis document inks, which are also permanent. Now, all I'm addressing here is the permanency, not actually flow. Although in my experience, those inks were very fast drying. That's why I got to this. But there are other options too. You could think of an ink type, like Parker Quink. It's called Quink for a reason, quick drying ink. My only problem with some of the Parker inks, for example their washable blue, is that it is a washable blue. Yes, it'll dry quickly. I haven't found it to feather particularly. I haven't found it to cause skipping in pens particularly. But again, it's a washable blue, and washable blues tend to fade. So I think you also need to consider, if you are signing books, your books, then I'm assuming that people will want that signature to remain in there. And I think that a lot of these quick drying washable inks will not be a very good choice. So my personal choice would be go for some permanent ink, whatever brand you can find, as long as it's a fountain pen ink, not an India ink, right? Because those are dangerous for fountain pens, but something permanent. What else was I going to say? Yeah, I mean, the simplest solution, of course, is to use a ballpoint, right? Because then you don't have the feathering, you don't have the drying issue, you don't have the permanency. Ballpoint ink is, I don't know if it's permanent, but it's more permanent than washable blue. But I'm assuming that that's not really the correct answer in your mind. So I would look at a permanent ink from a reasonable brand, reasonable fountain pen ink brand. Noodler's has a whole bunch of permanent inks that you might want to consider. And finally, of course, there's always iron gall inks. But those come with their own manual, cleaning instructions, etc., which I've addressed in a previous episode of this series of videos. Okay, then we have... Sorry, I'm just writing down the timestamps. In a nutshell, this question came down to, I have cleaned a demonstrator with alcohol and now the inside is cloudy. Is there anything I can do? No. Because that inside is now cloudy. I've been in the same situation, thinking that was a good idea. In my case, it wasn't an expensive pen. I hope in your case it was not an expensive pen either. The reality is, in my mind, there's nothing you can do because I tried a lot of things. Now, having said that, there are things you can do. You can polish the inside, but that requires some specialized equipment. Think of like lathe type equipment that you may or may not have in your household. You could chat with a friendly pen maker who might be willing to polish that inside, likely for a price. Or you accept that your pen is now cloudy. This is the way. Okay, now the final question I actually found very interesting, not that the other ones were not, but it was a bit more philosophical, which I kind of enjoyed. So I try to put one of these in these episodes every time. I am paraphrasing, but how do I really know if I like a pen? I bought pens in the past, and after receiving them, I had this feeling of uncertainty regarding keeping them. What is that? Well, we can have all sorts of discussions here. Buyer's remorse comes to mind, where you've purchased something and then you get it in the mail and it gives you that quick rush of excitement, hashtag dopamine, in your brain. Oh, I've purchased something, and then it arrives and you think, I spent $500 on this. ... which is not a good thing, right? That's buyer's remorse, and then you think, I don't know what I saw in this. So there is that. Beyond that, I think this ties in a little bit to something we discussed in one of the previous episodes. So I'll try not to get into that point too much. But we see a lot of pens. Just talking about pens, but this also applies to other products. We see a lot of pens on social media, and they're made to look really good. I can take a pen. It's Alberta winter right now. I can take a pen, I can put it in the snow in a sunny day. There'll be bright sunlight and reflections and glittering, and it will look beautiful. And it will look like a pen that you want to have. Right? So I'm not the only one, right? There are many people who do this, and companies make their living that way, right? Whether it's the actual brands or whether it is pen shops, they want their product to shine in the photography, in the videography, whatever it is they do. One second. Sorry. So I think there's also that as a possible effect, right? You've seen something, it looked really spectacular, but then you get it, and then you think, this is not really what I was expecting, or it's not as shiny, doesn't write as comfortably, doesn't, etc. I think this is very common, and I think this happens a lot, and I think there is this effect. It's quite pronounced in people who buy pens, especially people who buy expensive pens, because we tend to spend a lot of money on relatively simple objects, right? You're not buying a car or a house, you're buying a pen, and it can be a few $100 or a few $1,000s. The good news is, I do genuinely think it is common. And there's always cognitive dissonance reduction. It's very easy, so we know from social psychology, to convince ourselves that the pen was indeed very expensive, but that's okay because it's very special, and then you start to like it anyway. I'm not saying that that's a good thing, I'm just saying that that is a thing. But I think part of the question here also was, how do I know? How do I know whether the particular pen that I'm selecting is going to be a good match for me, right? Between me and the pen. Like we hit it off, like, oh yeah, like that kind of stuff. And I think there the short answer is there is no such way. You simply cannot buy a pen online and get a good feeling for it. A simple analogy, I have difficult feet. I don't dislike my feet, but I have strange feet. They're wide. And whereas many people's toes are kind of like this, my toes are pretty squarish. So I need broad shoes with, broad toes. Like, it's just the way it is. I need that kind of shoe, otherwise it's uncomfortable for me to walk. And one of the consequences of that is I cannot buy shoes online. I can't. Now, clearly I'm a fashionista, given my beautiful blue t-shirt. But I can't. I have a colleague who does. Buys very fancy shoes online. I can't do that. And that's okay. But what I'm trying to say is, when it comes to a fountain pen is a very personal tool. It's something that has to fit you, has to fit your hand, the way you hold the pen, your writing style. And you simply cannot get a feeling for that online. Then there is the fact that, again, you have to look at the source of where you're getting your information. If someone is reviewing a pen, but they sell that pen, then they're unlikely to say at any point in the review, this is an overpriced piece of crap. Why would they do that? Right? I don't think I have actually at any point literally said this is an overpriced piece of crap. But think about what happens when I review a pen. Whether the person who sent me that pen sells 10 or 100 or 1,000 or 0, I don't see any money. Now, this is not to toot my own horn. I think most reviewers out there are independent reviewers, and they may get sent some products once in a while, but they don't benefit from giving that product a positive or a negative review. People who sell that product do, because they have to sell that product in every meaning of that word. They have to sell the product, and they have to sell you on the product, right? Something to bear in mind. This is not a dig at anyone, right? But you have to look at that source of information. So then how do you do it? How do you know if the pen is a match for you? You don't. You don't. I cannot come up with any objective way for you to figure out through online sources whether a pen works for you, beyond Watch a couple of reviews if they're out there. Read reviews, right? Consider the source of the reviews. At some point, and I think I've discussed this earlier, so again, won't go into too much detail, but if you have found out, for example, that every time I review a pen and you think that's something that you like and then you buy it and it's terrible, well, then it looks like our tastes are different, right? Then if it turns out that, I don't know, who do we have? Kerry from Pens and Tea, or Penboy Roy, or like anyone else, doesn't matter, right? They review a pen, and then 2 or 3 times you've purchased a pen that they've reviewed and you love it, well, then it looks like your tastes are aligned, right? That's also something to take into account. The best way to do it, the best way to buy pens, to go to a shop, a brick and mortar store, or go to a pen show. Hold the pen, write with it, try it out. That at least will give you a feeling of whether or not it matches your hand, your writing angle, your writing style. It won't be perfect. You can't decide that in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But at least you've held that pen. And that's pretty much it. I know this is not very pleasant news, but I think it's just the way it is. Right? You can't objectively determine that a certain pen will be perfect for you based on online purchasing. It's not possible, in my mind. If anyone else feels differently about it, then by all means, let me know. The comments will be very useful, but I don't see how you would do it. And I'm afraid, and this is easy to say, but I'm afraid that when it comes to online pen buying or buying other things online, you win a few, you lose a few. And you can, again, reviews, watch reviews, read reviews, all that stuff, but you're going to win a few, you're going to lose a few. It's the way it is. So the final thing I will say is, many pen stores actually have very good return policies, but make sure you check that out in advance. Because maybe the pen just doesn't work for you, right? And at least you're able to return it. Now, I think the final aspect of the question, I'll be brief about that, is how do I know if I think that's how I interpreted it, at least. So how do I know if there is a click between me and that pen, and why is it that I then feel that remorse, right? Not the remorse is not the right word, but why do I lose that enthusiasm? Well, that's some of the things I think we discussed. Maybe a bit of cognitive dissonance, maybe a bit of buyer's remorse, maybe a combination of these things. And again, sometimes it looks really shiny in the ads and we want it, and then we buy it and we're like, that didn't work too well. It's a hard knock life, the pen world. On this happy note, I shall leave you. I hope that this was useful. I didn't mean to be super negative, but again, if you have any ideas on how to facilitate the process of online pen buying, then by all means do it. I mean, of course, many reviewers also provide measurements and that kind of stuff. At some point, you may figure out that sections over 12 millimeters diameter simply don't work for you, right? But that's that again, it's a trial and error process. And over time, I think that's what I was trying to say, and it just took me a very long time. Over time, you will learn what works for you, what does not work for you. And then you stick to that. Or not. Explore versus exploit. That's a discussion we've had in another video. I hope this was useful. I'm glad to see you later. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you leave me any other questions you may have, and I'll try to answer them as soon as I can. Bye!